Chapter 13. Broken Gun. After a short time the engine slowed and Susan could see they were passing through some lock gates. Then the engine stopped and so did the barge. Above her the shouting and laughing had stopped to be replaced by whispers and the occasional shh. Someone said, "Let's see how they're getting on," and the cabin door was unlocked and opened to reveal a collection of ogling faces. Susan flung one of the cans at them, which burst on the door frame, covering them in lager. She immediately threw another, which hit one of them full in the face. They withdrew and locked the door again. Susan could hear Smythe's voice again. "Let's leave them to it." "We can wait in the car," said another. "Suppose he just sleeps all night," said someone else. Brian Smythe again. "I know what'll wake him up. Untie that mooring rope. Yeah, that one." Then after a pause, "Right, everyone off the boat." Susan could feel the barge rocking as 9 people jumped ashore. Then, "This ought to do the trick." She could hear the rattle of a ratchet wheel and then the sound of rushing water. The voices and laughter receded as her captors walked away. What the hell have they done now? She asked herself. She began to realise what they had done when the barge began descending like a lift. They've opened the sluice to drain the lock, but why? Then, as the cabin began to tilt enough for the loose objects to slide along the floor, she realised why. The bastards have left it tied up at one end. These events seemed to have the desired effect on the future groom, because he woke up to find himself sliding feet towards the lower end of his bunk. "I say, this is a bit off. What the devil's happening?" Susan decided to ignore him. Instead she began climbing towards the cabin door, which, because of how much the barge was tilting, was now more in the position of a loft trap door than an entranceway. "Where's all this blasted H2O coming from?" asked her companion. Muddy liquid was bubbling up through the floor and was now level with his knees. He made a vain attempt to catch his shoes as they floated away from him. The water outside was now lapping against the porthole. Susan managed to climb up and lay on her back on the end of one of the bunks. From there she was able to lift her legs up and press her feet against the door. She pressed as hard as she could, but this had no effect whatsoever. She began kicking wildly in a spasm very close to panic. She stopped because she could hear a voice. "That you, Susan? Keep calm, love. I'll have you out in a jiffy." I know that voice, she thought. There was a crunching sound and the door was lifted open. Susan was blinded by the light of a torch until it was put to one side. Then she saw the grinning face of her rescuer. "Hello, love, remember me?" Susan almost fell off into the water. "My God, it's Craig!" She was looking directly at the face she saw last on the floor of the Old Bell public house with the dessert spoon up his nostril. Another face appeared alongside the first, that of Ellie Green, this time without her Nell Gwyn costume. "Hello again, Susan. This is my boyfriend Craig. You've met before, I think." Susan looked from one to the other with her mouth open and wide-eyed with astonishment. "Yes," she said hoarsely, but much relieved that she could speak again. Ellie was speaking again at high speed as usual. "Craig almost recognised you when I was sitting in your car, but when he heard me say 'Susan,' he remembered who you were and insisted that we came down here to help look for you. He heard me talking about you on the phone when your sister called me." "My sister?" "Yeah," said Ellie. "She phoned me when she found me visiting cards. You must have dropped them somewhere. I told her about the stag party in the boat. Is that all right? Craig is a changed man and doesn't drink any more. About time, you know. When you met him before, well, he wants to apologise, don't you, Craig?" "Yeah, no hard feelings, eh, love?" he said and held out his hand. "None at all," said Susan sweetly. "But if it's not too much trouble, would you mind lifting me out of here? I think my feet are going to get wet very soon." He's a lovely man, really. As the 3 of them stepped onto dry land, Ellie said, "Your sister must be here somewhere, and it sounded like there was someone with her." "And there she is," said Susan. "And that's my lovely man with her." She ran towards them only a few paces because John was arriving fast. To avoid collision, he took her in his arms and swung her round in a circle, only once because they were overwhelmed with an immediate need to cover each other with kisses. "Ah," said Ellie, "Isn't it lovely, Craig?" "Yes," said Craig. Lindsay, who had been standing with her weight on one leg and her arms folded, grinned and said, "Hello, sis." Susan relaxed her hold on her lover and hugged her sister. "I knew you'd come. Thank you, thank you." "Why are you holding a shotgun?" "It belongs to that Smythe idiot. John took it off him." "Did he?" "Oh, yeah, he's quite a hero, your boyfriend." "I know." She put her arm round him again and Lindsay hugged them both. "But you can't have him, he's mine." Reluctantly she broke away from their loving embraces as she remembered her manners. Introductions. "John and Lindsay, these are two real heroes as well. They rescued me from the boat. This is Ellie and her boyfriend Craig." Ellie shook hands with Lindsay. "We spoke on the phone, but it's really nice to meet you." John shook hands with Craig. Susan saw the bewildered expression on her lover's face and said, "Yeah, you have met before, in the Old Bell pub." "Craig is a changed man, apparently. We've agreed to forget that incident. It never happened. Isn't that right, Craig?" "Yes." Ellie was looking slightly puzzled. "Why have you got the same dresses on?" Lindsay answered her. "It's a bit of a long and complicated story." "What's that?" She stopped and turned towards the barge. "Would somebody help me, please? I can't get out and I'm soaking wet." "Oh, that's Giles," explained Susan. "He's the one the party's for, but I don't think he's enjoying it much." A few minutes later, 4 tired but happy people and one miserable wet one walked side by side towards the sad and deflated young men who stood beside the estate car. Ginger came to meet them, glancing towards Craig as John gave him the shotgun to hold. "I'm glad you're back safely, all of you, that is." He stopped because they all walked straight past him as if he wasn't there. "Are you all right, Giles?" "No," said Giles. "I think you ought to give him some of your dry clothes or a blanket or something," said John, without looking at anyone in particular. "But I have to admit I don't really care a toss what any of you do." "Susan, it looks as if some little magic elves have pushed your sister's car out of the mud." Ginger and the others looked for a slight sign of gratitude, but none was forthcoming. "God, I hope I've still got the keys," said Susan, rummaging in her handbag. "Yes, here they are." And then to John she said, "I want to go home now." "Go on, you go." "Are you all right to drive?" "I'm fine. Are you coming, Lindsay?" "Yes, but I'll drive you. It is my car after all, underneath all that mud. We'll be home in 5 minutes and I'll warm up your supper in 2 shakes. It's only soup." "Soup will be heaven, if I can keep awake, that is." "Goodbye, Ellie and Craig, and thanks again. Will you be all right on your own, John? Why are you looking at me like that?" "Oh, nothing. I'll tell you later," he said, smiling. "I'll stay for a bit if you like," said Craig. "Thanks," said John. "He's a lovely man," said Ellie. "I'll stay too." After the 2 sisters had driven off, there was a strange silence. Ginger spoke first. "What happens now?" "I'll tell you in a minute. First of all, where is Brian Smythe?" "He's asleep, more like unconscious, actually. I could try to wake him up, but I really don't think there's any point." "Craig, pass me that gun, please." There were a few anxious faces as he walked towards the estate car. "The gun is very expensive, beautiful craftsmanship, must be worth a few £1,000. The trouble is I get really angry when someone points a gun at me." The estate car had a front bumper like a steel girder. John pushed the barrels of the gun behind it. "Can you give me a hand?" he said to Craig. They both took hold of the butt and heaved until the barrels were bent at an angle of 90 degrees. Then they turned the gun around and wedged the stock behind the bumper. With one twist they reduced the butt and the trigger mechanism to splinters of wood and bits of metal. John handed the pieces to Ginger. "Please give this to him with my compliments when he wakes up." Then after a short pause he spoke to the rest of the deflated party-goers. "The only reason I haven't got the police involved so far is because Susan and her sister don't want to attract any publicity. You should consider yourselves very lucky. I have enough evidence to convict you all on charges of assault, abduction, unlawful imprisonment and various acts of threatened violence, including the use of a firearm. This evidence I intend to put in a sealed envelope and give to my solicitor. I hope I never see or hear from any of you ever again. Now, the only thing that remains is a wrecked barge in the lock. Where did it come from?" "Brian hired it," said Ginger. "I know he had to pay a huge deposit on it so that it would cover the cost of any damage. He has plenty of money, though." John held up the keys to the estate car. "Can one of you drive? I mean, are you sober enough? Actually, I don't give a damn what you do or what happens to you. I'm too bloody tired." He threw the keys on the grass, turned his back on them and said goodbye to Ellie and Craig and walked to his own car. He arrived at Herbert Street 5 minutes later, remembered he still had the key to the back door and let himself in. As he suspected, there was no signs of anyone being awake. He found his suitcase in the hall where he had left it and carried it upstairs. The door of Susan's room was open, and in it he discovered the two sisters sound asleep on top of the duvet, still wearing identical green dresses. They were both lying on their right shoulders, so no tattoo was visible. He had no notion which of them was Susan. "This is getting more and more bizarre," he thought. He carried his suitcase into the other bedroom and, like everyone else in the house, collapsed on the bed, fully clothed, and slept soundly.